NVK folder items is a set of scripts for Reaper which allow you to easily organize, edit, and render assets in projects of any size. They are designed with the game audio workflow in mind, but may have other applications as well. Before I begin, I just want to quickly demonstrate how easy it is to name, number, and render your assets. So first, just select the assets you want to render, add them to a folder, rename them, and then run the render script. It's now rendered it into the folder that you've selected, and it's also copied another version of it into your project. This way, if you make a new version, you can render over the old version in the target directory, but you'll still maintain a backup of your previous render, and you can access it inside the project. So let's back up a bit and go through each of the steps one at a time. There's also some render settings you'll want to set up and save as your default template. So the first script that I use there is called create new folder from selected items or tracks. This script is super useful when creating folder items. What it does is take your selection, whether it's a group of items or a group of tracks, and then when you run it, it creates a folder here. Also has these folder items created at the top. If instead of selecting tracks, you select items, it will automatically create a new folder and move those tracks along with their effects to a different folder. So for example, if I had an effect on this track and I select just these items, when I run the create new folder script, it's added these to a new folder and preserved the track effects as well. This way, if I want to master sets of assets differently, it's very simple. I can just make two folders, which can easily be collapsed, and add a different effect to each folder. You may have noticed that I'm quickly collapsing the folders as well. The way to do that is through these mouse modifier scripts here. These ones, you just assign them in your mouse modifier settings. They can be on the track control panel or the item. But to make it easier, I've included folder item settings script, which does it for you. So if you run this, you can just hit set mouse modifiers. And then now, if you double click on a folder item or double click on a track, it'll automatically open and close the folders for you. In addition, it will group the items so you can easily move them around if you want. Now that I have folder items created, I just want to quickly talk about what folder items are. Folder items are essentially blank items Reaper allows you to use to render your assets. When you render these items, they take into account all sends going to that track. And when you create a folder, it automatically assigns all these tracks as sends to this parent track. So if I name this, and this is using my folder items rename script, and I'll just call this Explosion Whoosh. Now they're all named and numbered. I can select these items and then run my render script, NVK folder items render. So with that, this opens up the normal render dialog, but it automatically selects only the folder items for you. And the settings you want to have for your render are selected media items via master. What this does is it's going to use these items to render, but since these tracks are all sending to this track, it's actually rendering all the tracks in this folder as one single item. For the file name, I like to just have it set to $item, and this means whatever the name you have here is what it's going to render as. So it's a really simple workflow. But some people might have different naming conventions or want to use different modifiers. You can set it to whatever you want. It's important that this is set to via master and not just selected media items, because via master means that it's going to incorporate all the effects along the chain. So what you hear in your project is what you'll hear in the render. So I like to just have a limiter on my master, and this means I don't have to duplicate it for each folder that I'm rendering. Aside from that, the other setting, which is optional, is the add rendered items to new tracks in project. Normally, I'm not a huge fan of this setting. That's just because I like to render directly into my Wwise Originals folder. And if I want to render over those assets, I can't do it from this project if they're imported in the project. That's because you can't render over a file that you have open in Reaper. So it actually becomes a little bit annoying. However, I made this script render smart, which gets around that by automatically duplicating the file and putting it into your Reaper project folder so that you're not actually rendering over the asset that's in Reaper. You can copy these settings if you'd like, and then just change the directory to wherever you want. You don't need a tail if you're using my Render Smart script because that can be set on the fly. So when you're done, you can just hit apply. And if you want, you can render from here. I would recommend using this Render Smart script instead. So what this one does is give you a few options. You can set the channel count, and you can also set the tail length. So if you have a reverb effect on, that's nice for that. And then it also gives you this option to do a sausage file. So if you set this to 1 and then you render, it's actually going to render all these as a single file. So this is really nice if you're making a sound library, but you still want to use this workflow. If you just want to render them normally, maybe add a tail. You can add a tail in seconds. I'll do 0.2. And now all your assets are rendered with a short tail. It's important to use these scripts that I made for rendering because it allows you to have auto select on for the folder items. This means if you click on a folder item, it's going to automatically select everything in the folder without them even being grouped. So it does take a second to refresh, but this means that you can easily move around groups of items and reposition them, and then not worry about rendering every single item that's selected. So you can see with the render script, even though I have quite a few items selected, if I run it, it only selects the folder items. You can also render individual items too with it. So if I select these and hit render, it will keep them selected. It's intelligent enough to know if you're trying to render folder items or just individual items. Okay, so now what if you make changes? Let's say you decide to pitch this down, or you mute some layers, and now your folder items are incorrect. Well, there's two ways you can handle this. One way is using this add new items to existing folder script. So this is the manual way. The first time you run it, just double click, and then it's going to warn you that it's changing your double click mouse modifiers for tracks. So just hit OK. And now when you double click on a track, it's going to automatically fix the folder items for you. You can also make a time selection and just fix only those folder items if you want. The easier way is to use this script called NVK folder items. So this script is always running once you run it. So I'll just do that right now. And I've added it to my toolbar here so that I can see that it's on. And the first time you run it, if you turn it off, it's going to give you this warning and just say, remember my answer for the script, and then terminate instances. And now it will turn on and off whenever you click. So with it on, you can see it also generates these markers for you, which show you where your folder items are. So if I name this asset 2, then I have a marker there. And so it becomes really easy to just navigate your project. And now if I make any changes, the folder items update automatically. And if I add a new variation, you can see it automatically gets named and numbered. The settings for this are in the folder item settings script. So there's a few different options. One of them is auto select. What this does is if you click on a folder item, it's going to automatically select the items in the folder, even if they're not grouped. It can take a second to refresh, but it allows you to easily move things around or change the volume without having to select everything yourself. There's also a setting for markers, which you can turn on or off. Once you click in here, it will start to take effect. And you can also change the colors of them as well. There's a setting to display the name in notes. And what this does is, and this displays the folder item name in the notes so you can see it more easily. There's also a setting for the punctuation you want to use when replacing spaces. I use an underscore for all of my names, but you might use a hyphen, or perhaps you want to just use actual spaces. If so, you can change it to a space, and now you can see that it's no longer putting a hyphen before the number. And if I rename these and don't replace spaces, now I have a naming convention without any underscores. The rest of these settings are for the editing scripts, such as fades, the folder creation, and then some render settings. I'm not going to go through all of them in this tutorial. There's also some experimental settings, which I don't necessarily recommend you use. This one, it will automatically open and close the video window if you have video items in your project. Larger item notes, if I turn this on, makes the names larger, but they also look kind of weird sometimes. This mouse modifier setting actually adds additional mouse modifiers. You can see them here, but these are just reposition scripts that I've added, and depending on the mouse modifier you're using, it will do a different type of reposition. So this means I can quickly line up my items the way I want and do a different type of repositioning depending on the modifier key that I'm holding. So let's talk a bit about the editing scripts. The first one is align. So what this one does is it will align your items by their snap offset. So with these ones, you can see this item is slightly off. If I run the align script, now all the items are matched up to the snap offset. These deselect scripts you probably don't need, but they're just there in case you need to create custom actions and you want to exclude folder items or only work on folder items. Fade in and fade out. So these scripts, they will create a fade wherever your mouse is hovering. So if I want to create a fade on this item here, I put my mouse where I want the fade to go, and then I'll do fade out. If I do a fade in there, it will fade to that spot. And you can see it's also drawn in some volume automation. So if I do a fade past the fade in, I actually have it pretend that it's fading to that point and use volume automation instead. So you can get some more complex fade shapes really easily. And the reason I did this is so that you can actually fade groups of items and it will still make sense. So if I hover over a folder item, it works on the entire set of sounds. So as you can see, it drew a fade out to that exact point on everything. And same with the fade ins. And using volume automation, it can fade the sound as though it's one single sound. Mouse wheel pitch shift. This is a special type of pitch shifting which works well with groups of items. So if you use it on a single item, and right now I have it assigned to my mouse wheel and using a modifier key. If I hover over the item, it's going to pitch up and down based on the snap offset point. But if I have a group selected, or I hover over a folder item, it's going to pitch them all together. So it's as though it's one item. These items here move with the pitch shift. And this also works on multiple groups as well. And if I hover, you can see it does the same thing. So this allows me to quickly pitch shift my items and groups. Remove. This script does a lot of different things, but basically it just removes whatever is under your mouse cursor. So right here, if I run it, there's nothing there, so it doesn't do anything. But if I hover over an item and run the script, it will delete. If I hover over a folder item, it will delete the whole group. Same with video. And I can also delete tracks, automation tracks, and automation items. So it's a versatile script, which allows you to quickly get rid of things. Rename, I already talked about a little bit. Basically, just select the items you want to rename. And I have it set to first track only, because I usually only want to name the top level track. And then there's some settings here, depending on what your naming convention is. So these reposition scripts here, the ones that are smart are mostly meant to work as mouse modifiers for DoubleClick because they look at the track you have selected. So if I want to reposition in different ways. I'll use those using the mouse modifier set up in the settings. Reposition groups. This one, it lets you set the time you want to use. And if you do a negative number, it will reposition based on the end of the group. So if I want a second in between, I can just do -1, and then it will reposition them that way. The last few scripts are split and trim. So split is like the other scripts, you just hover your mouse where you want to do a split. So if you do it over an item, it'll split it there. But if you do it over a folder item, it will split all of the items in the group. And trim is the same way. You just hover your mouse and run it. So here I'm going to run the trim right edge, and it will trim all the items, but you can also do individual ones as well. And if your mouse is outside of the item, it will extend it. Same with the group. That was trim right edge, and trim left edge is the same thing, except on the left edge. And yeah, that's folder items. It's a really powerful set of scripts. So yeah, check it out. Thanks.